Hello everyone and welcome to my Bold and Beautiful Today channel.
Ridge vs. Nick, Luna's gift to Hayes, and Taylor's support. Nick Marone is ordered to leave Brooke Logan by Ridge Forrester. Hayes Forrester Finnegan receives a present from Luna Nozawa in the meanwhile. Nick Marone vs. Ridge Forrester. Ridge wants to know why Nick is visiting Forrester Creations. Life on a boat is brought to life by the designer. Home is wherever he puts his anchor, Nick responds. Nick wants his anchor inside Brooke right now. Jack Marone is mentioned once more. Jack has been brought up twice in the past week. Congratulating his adversary on their reunion with Taylor Hayes, the shipping man says. Ridge and Nick's conversation becomes heated. Nick strides out after giving Brooke a kiss on the hand. Brooke makes an effort to clarify. Brooke, you don't need to elaborate. In any case, the blonde clarifies that Nick's return was completely unexpected. He is simply an excellent friend. According to Brooke, her ex has no right to feel envious. She is told to avoid Nick by Ridge. Really, Ridge? It's not a puppy, Brooke. The assistants of Taylor Hayes. Taylor is discussing the art class with Steffi Forrester Finnegan at the Cliff House. With Hayes, Steffi mentions how wonderful Electra Forrester is. The conversation shifts to Liam Spencer. He's showing such bravery. Taylor attributes all of Liam's stress to Bill Spencer. According to Taylor, John Finn Finnegan may feel some responsibility for Luna's fate. Taylor worries that Steffi is suffering from the stress. Hayes will never meet Luna, the daughter says. She will see to that. The gift of Luna Nozawa. Luna is still watching the art class outside the beach home. Hayes forgot something as the instructor ushered everyone in from the beach. Finding what he dropped is proving to be difficult for Hayes. Luna uses the chance to approach Hayes while the teacher and other children are inside. After addressing him by name, Luna presents him with a present. As Hayes presents his gift to Electra, Luna remains outside. Hayes is brought back to his parents' house by Electra. In the meantime, Luna is invited to serve as a guest instructor by the art teacher. Luna initially appears alarmed before realizing that this is her pass to Hayes. She then introduces herself as Sunshine and enters. At Forrester Creations, the tension in the air was so thick it could have been cut with the shears used to trim silk, and Ridge Forrester stood near the grand marble table that dominated the design room, his arms folded across his chest, his jaw set in that determined, furrowed way that signaled a storm was about to break loose, his eyes darkening as they locked on the figure standing in front of him, none other than Nick Marone, who sauntered in with his signature swagger, the faint scent of sea salt and boat oil clinging to him like an invisible badge of honor, a living testament to the time he had spent out on the open waters, away from the chaos of Los Angeles and the complicated lives entwined in the Forrester dynasty, and Ridge, ever the protective father, loyal son, and possessive former lover, narrowed his gaze and demanded to know why Nick had resurfaced now, especially here, in the heart of Forrester Creations, where memories of past love triangles still clung to the seams of the fashion sketches that adorned the walls like echoes of broken promises and rekindled flames, and Nick, unbothered and exuding the rugged calm of a man who'd wrestled with storms far more violent than Ridge's righteous indignation, grinned slightly, brushing his hand through his salt and pepper hair and said something cryptic about life on the boat, that a home isn't about walls and foundations, but rather wherever he drops his anchor, and as he said this, his tone dropped meaningfully. The implication hanging in the air like cigar smoke, right now, the place he wanted to anchor was Brooke Logan, and the use of her name, casual, almost possessive, made Ridge flinch ever so slightly, and he stepped forward, his designer shoes hitting the polished floors with calculated force, warning Nick not to overstep, and then, as if emboldened by the tension or perhaps motivated by a mix of nostalgia and provocation, Nick brought up Jack Marone, his own son, for the second time in a week. Reminding Ridge of a familial entanglement that neither of them could ever fully sever, and congratulated Ridge with exaggerated sincerity on reuniting with Taylor Hayes, his soulmate in theory if not in daily practice, and that's when the conversation shifted from pointed politeness to heated confrontation, with raised voices echoing against the high ceilings, the creative energy of the room morphing into a battlefield of old regrets and lingering desires, and just before the confrontation, could escalate further. Nick took Brooke's hand, kissed it with deliberate slowness, his lips brushing the back of her fingers in a gesture both respectful and provocative, then turned on his heel and exited with that familiar Marone arrogance, leaving Ridge simmering and Brooke wide-eyed, caught between two men who had, at different points in her life, claimed pieces of her heart. And when Ridge turned to her, his voice low but intense, she began to explain despite his initial claim that she didn't have to. Brooke always had a flair for dramatic honesty when it came to love, and she insisted that Nick's reappearance was just as much a shock to her as it was to Ridge, that he was simply a friend, someone from her past who had popped up unexpectedly like a ghost from another lifetime. But Ridge, fueled by possessiveness masked as concern, cut her off, saying she needed to stay away from Nick, that his intentions were obvious and unwelcome, to which Brooke, her eyes flashing with defiance, snapped back that she wasn't a puppy he could order around, and that he had no right to dictate her friendships, especially when they were both still figuring out what they were to each other. And as this standoff simmered in the halls of fashion royalty, elsewhere at the Cliff House overlooking the endless, crashing waves of the Pacific Ocean, Taylor Hayes sat with Steffy Forrester Finnegan, her beautiful, assertive daughter, discussing the latest installment of Hayes's art class, which had unexpectedly become a focal point for emotional healing and family expression. And as Taylor gently sipped her herbal tea, the kind she always drank when she needed to ground herself, she listened attentively as Steffy praised Electra Forrester's intuitive way with Hayes, how Electra seemed to speak his language without words, guiding him gently through color and imagination. And while the two women sat in the cozy warmth of the living room, their conversation turned inevitably toward Liam Spencer, and how valiantly he was handling the latest storm in his life. The pressure from Bill Spencer casting long shadows over every choice he made, and Taylor, always empathetic and perceptive, murmured that John Finn Finnegan might secretly carry a weight of guilt about how things turned out with Luna Nozawa, a name that made Steffy's jaw clench involuntarily. And as the ocean roared in the distance, Taylor quietly voiced a mother's fear that all this tension was quietly chipping away at Steffy's well-being, that the weight of being a mother, wife, CEO, and emotional linchpin for the Forrester family was beginning to manifest in subtle ways. But Steffy, ever the warrior, waved off the concern and declared with absolute certainty that Hayes would never, under any circumstances, know Luna, and that she would make sure of it, her voice steely, her eyes unblinking. And even though Taylor understood her daughter's protective instincts, a small part of her wondered if keeping the truth from Hayes, whatever that truth turned out to be, would one day backfire, just like so many family secrets had before. And meanwhile, not far from that very house, Luna Nozawa stood on the perimeter of the art class, hidden partially by a row of seagrasses swaying in the wind, her heart racing as she watched the children gather their supplies and prepare to leave the beach and return inside. And her eyes followed one child in particular, Hayes, the little boy with the dark curls and serious eyes, who reminded her so much of a time she both longed for and regretted. And as the teacher herded the kids inside, Hayes lingered, his eyes scanning the sand for something he'd dropped, a seashell, perhaps, or a crayon. It wasn't clear, but he was struggling to find it. And Luna, driven by a mix of maternal instinct and unspoken longing, stepped up from behind the grasses and called him gently by name. And when Hayes looked up at her, curiosity and confusion mingling on his young face, she knelt down and handed him a small package, wrapped in a cloth napkin, tied with string, a gift she had brought just for him. And as their fingers brushed briefly, she whispered, "This is for you." And before he could ask any questions, she stepped back, allowing him to return to Electra, who was now walking toward them. And as Hayes showed Electra the gift, a delicate wooden carving of a dolphin with his name etched on the side, Electra looked puzzled but said nothing, taking Hayes by the hand and leading him back toward the Cliff House, where Finn and Steffy were waiting. And as Luna watched them go, her heart tightened, knowing that even the smallest gesture came with consequences in this world of secrets and half-truths. And before she could slip away unnoticed, the art teacher emerged from the building and asked her, clearly having noticed her presence before, if she'd be willing to volunteer as a guest instructor, her tone hopeful, her eyes warm. And Luna froze for a moment, her mind racing through possibilities. The risk of getting closer to Hayes, battling with the desperate hope of finding a place in his life, even if from the shadows. And after a long pause, she nodded and said her name was Sunshine, adopting the name she once used in a children's art program as a way to remain anonymous, and stepped inside, the door closing behind her with a soft click, sealing her next move and possibly setting in motion a chain of events no one, especially Steffy, was prepared to confront. And while Ridge remained preoccupied with fending off the emotional wrecking ball that was Nick Marone, and Taylor braced herself for the next emotional crisis looming, over her already strained daughter, the delicate threads connecting these fractured families tightened, vibrating with secrets, jealousy, hope, and the unrelenting desire to rewrite the past even as the future barrels forward, unstoppable, unpredictable, and utterly soaked in drama. And in the heart of it all stood a little boy named Hayes, blissfully unaware that his innocent gift on the beach was more than a kind gesture. It was the first ripple in a tide that would soon rise and engulf them all. Ridge Forrester and Nick Marone square off. Nick Marone, played by Jack Wagner, is back. The major comeback is scheduled for this week, and fans can anticipate an exciting spectacle. All indications lean to a reconciliation between Nick Marone and Brooke Logan, but only if Ridge Forrester is involved. Here are the spoilers for Bold and Beautiful's upcoming week. The return of Ridge's brother. Since Ridge left her during the takeover of Forrester Creations a few months ago, Brooke Logan has been pleading with him to give her another opportunity. However, he has been playing house with Taylor Hayes, his other ex-wife, and doesn't give a damn about what Brooke has been doing to. Pulling up with his estranged brother on your arm is the perfect approach to get Ridge's attention. According to teasers for The Bold and the Beautiful, Brooke will succeed if her goal is to incite Ridge's jealousy. If you have watched the CBS soap opera throughout the years, you are aware that Ridge's biological father, Massimo, is the father of Nick Marone. The conflict at Brooke. Despite having quite different lifestyles and never getting along, the two men had one thing in common: they were both in love with Brooke Logan. The two brothers fought for Taylor Hayes, their other shared ex-wife, when they weren't fighting over Brooke. Regarding Taylor, she will likely be devastated to learn that Ridge is still covertly harboring feelings for Brooke behind her back. BNB teasers indicate that before the week is up, the two brothers will engage in a violent altercation. Which team are you on, Ridge or Nick? Is Brooke merely using Nick to attract Ridge's attention and arouse his jealousy? The sun was setting over Los Angeles, casting a golden hue over the skyline as Forrester Creations buzzed with tension behind its sleek, modern walls. Somewhere in the executive wing, whispers swirled. Jack Wagner was back, and with him, Nick Marone, the rugged sea captain turned fashion mogul whose return had already sent shockwaves through the corridors of power. Ridge Forrester, forever the golden son of the Forrester family but biologically the child of Massimo Marone, felt a tremor under his otherwise immovable facade. It had been years since he faced his half-brother, and now, destiny, or more accurately, Brooke Logan, had brought Nick crashing back into his carefully ordered life. Ridge had barely begun to process Brooke's latest plea for forgiveness, her teary eyes pleading for another chance, when she was suddenly spotted stepping out of Il Giardino's with none other than Nick Marone. Hand in hand. Smiling. Public. Calculated. It was a move that stung more than he would ever admit, even to Taylor Hayes, who had recently taken up residence in the echoing space of his affections, a placeholder for a heart that always seemed to beat to the rhythm of Brooke's chaos. Taylor, intuitive as always, had sensed the shift, that cold distance in Ridge's embrace, the vacant look when she spoke of the future, the restless way he stared out windows as if chasing a ghost. But it wasn't just any ghost. It was Brooke. And now Nick was standing beside her like a defiant shadow from the past, reminding Ridge of all the ways he had failed to hold on to the one woman he could never quite forget. It wasn't just about love. It never was with Ridge and Nick. It was about legacy. Identity. Power. The fact that Nick was Massimo's acknowledged son, the product of grit and saltwater and hard-earned success, while Ridge had grown up in the Forrester name under a lie, always with a chip on his shoulder that no amount of couture or boardroom wins could erase. Their rivalry had been forged not just through women but through blood, resentment, and the collision of two vastly different upbringings. Ridge, the artist, the perfectionist, the prince of the runway. Nick, the rebel, the sailor, the rough-cut diamond who always seemed to shine when Ridge least expected it. And now, that old feud was back on center stage, this time with Brooke once again at the heart of the storm. Whispers in the fashion house turned into roars. The rumor mill churned. Nick was in meetings. Brooke was glowing. Ridge was brooding. Eric tried to play peacemaker, but his voice had lost the weight it once carried. Even Steffi and Thomas were taking sides, with Thomas oddly respectful of Nick's straightforwardness and Steffi rolling her eyes at what she saw as Brooke's tired game of emotional ping-pong. But it was more than games. It was war. A quiet one, at first, stolen glances across the Forrester conference table, verbal jabs wrapped in polite language, subtle power moves over designs and business decisions. Then came the photo. A tabloid shot of Nick kissing Brooke on the cheek outside of Spencer Publications, the headline reading, "Second time's the charm?" It was all Ridge needed to snap. He confronted Brooke, fire in his eyes, accusation dripping from every syllable. But she stood her ground. "You made your choice, Ridge," she said, her voice calm but cutting. "You moved on. So did I." But Ridge hadn't moved on, not really. And now, the image of Brooke in Nick's arms haunted him, not because he didn't expect it, but because deep down, he feared she looked happier than she had in years. And Nick? Nick was dangerous because he didn't play by Ridge's rules. He didn't dress the part, didn't bend the knee, didn't need anyone's approval, least of all Ridge's. Their last encounter years ago had ended with harsh words, a few bruises, and an unspoken truce forged by mutual exhaustion. But now, that fragile peace was shattered. The confrontation was inevitable. It happened not in the boardroom, but on the beach, fitting, really, as the sea had always been Nick's domain. Ridge stormed down the boardwalk where he'd heard Brooke and Nick were taking a private stroll. The waves crashed, the wind whipped, and there they were, Brooke in white, the fabric clinging to her in the ocean breeze, Nick beside her, casual and commanding as ever. Ridge's arrival was a thunderclap. Words were exchanged, loud, brutal, honest. Nick accused Ridge of treating Brooke like a backup plan, of never truly appreciating the depth of her loyalty. Ridge called Nick an opportunist, a has-been, a cheap imitation of a real man. Brooke tried to intervene, but her voice was lost beneath the crescendo of masculine pride and unresolved bitterness. Then it happened, a shove, a punch, two brothers grappling in the sand like wounded lions fighting over a pride they had both lost and regained a dozen times. It wasn't just about Brooke anymore. It was about everything they had never said, every slight left to fester, every woman caught in the crossfire of their endless war. Security was called, but not before the entire altercation was caught on someone's phone, uploaded, shared, trending by the time Brooke helped pull them apart, her hands trembling. Taylor watched the video from her phone in the Forrester mansion, her heart breaking not for Ridge, but for herself, realizing that she had merely been the balm for a wound Ridge never wanted to heal. Katie gasped. Donna clutched pearls. Hope was silent, stunned by the rawness of it all. And in the days that followed, Los Angeles buzzed with speculation. Was Brooke serious about Nick? Was Ridge spiraling? Would Eric intervene? Or would the battle lines drawn in the sand solidify into something far more permanent? Nick, for his part, remained unapologetic. In press interviews, he called Brooke the one that got away, and the one I won't lose again. Ridge, licking his wounds, stared long into the mirror of his father's office, seeing not himself, but the boy who had always needed to win even when love was never a game. Brooke, now caught between two legacies, two versions of what could have been, found herself at the center of a media storm and a personal reckoning. Was she using Nick to make Ridge jealous? Perhaps. But in the process, she had also rediscovered something real, the simplicity of being wanted without conditions. And Nick, for all his flaws, had never asked her to be anyone but herself. The bold and the beautiful had always been about passion, betrayal, and redemption. But this time, the stakes felt higher. Because this wasn't just a love triangle. This was a reckoning. A reckoning decades in the making. Ridge versus Nick. Brother versus brother. Heart versus ego. And Brooke? She wasn't the prize. She was the storm they both couldn't weather. And as the days unfolded, and the fallout took hold, one truth became crystal clear: some rivalries never die. They just wait in the shadows for the perfect moment to erupt again. And in the world of Forrester and Marone, no moment is ever quiet for long. Ridge Forrester never imagined that a routine evening in Los Angeles would spiral into a life-altering revelation, yet the subtle tension he had sensed for weeks now had finally reached a breaking point. Taylor Hayes had grown more distant, distracted, and often on edge when asked simple questions about her whereabouts or the countless late-night phone calls she dismissed with shaky reassurances. Ridge, a man who had seen lies destroy lives, especially within the Forrester family, knew when someone was hiding something, and this time, the woman he trusted most was guarding a secret so heavy it bent her posture and dulled the light in her eyes. The moment of discovery began innocently enough when Ridge, returning early from a business trip in Milan, decided to surprise Taylor with a quiet dinner at home, but when he entered her house, the sound of muffled voices drew him down the hallway to her study, where the door was slightly ajar and her voice, tinged with fear, was urgently whispering into the phone. He heard fragments. "It's too late, he knows something. I can't protect him forever." After she hung up, Taylor froze when she saw Ridge standing there, his expression a mosaic of confusion, betrayal, and fear. In the confrontation that followed, Taylor resisted at first, but Ridge's persistence and heartache broke through her defenses, and she confessed, haltingly, painfully, that decades earlier, during her time volunteering in Africa, a tragedy had occurred, one that had been buried under layers of bureaucracy and silence. She had accidentally administered the wrong medication to a young child during a clinic emergency, resulting in the child's death. The local officials had covered it up to avoid scandal, but Taylor had lived with the guilt every day, and in recent months, the child's older brother, now grown and politically connected, had discovered the truth and begun threatening her with exposure, blackmail, and retribution, not just legal, but personal. She had paid him hush money, sold off assets quietly, and lied to protect her past from reaching her family, especially Ridge, because she feared it would shatter the fragile trust they had rebuilt after so many years of tumult. As Taylor revealed the extent of the blackmail and her growing fear that the man intended to destroy everything she loved, Ridge's heart warred with itself, his instinct to protect her colliding with his outrage over being shut out. He couldn't fathom that the woman he'd built a life with had been carrying this unbearable secret alone, spiraling into desperation while he remained oblivious. Yet as the night unfolded, and as Taylor shared the entire story, tears spilling, her voice cracking, Ridge came to see not just the horror of what she had endured, but the quiet courage it took to face it all. Still, forgiveness would not come easily. Ridge, haunted by past betrayals, especially those involving secrecy and lies, wrestled with what this meant for their future. The trust that had taken so long to rebuild now felt like a fragile vase teetering on the edge of a shelf. Over the next days, Ridge embarked on a personal investigation, confirming Taylor's account, even confronting the man blackmailing her, a vengeful, bitter soul who had exploited his sister's death as a tool of revenge, not justice. Ridge used his influence and resources to negotiate a truce, offering the man a platform to tell his story through a charitable medical reform initiative instead of pursuing vendetta. But even as the external threat dissipated, the deeper issue lingered: Ridge's internal struggle. Could he live with a version of Taylor he hadn't known existed? Could love coexist with such a fundamental breach of transparency? Taylor, meanwhile, offered no excuses, only a willingness to step back if it meant preserving Ridge's peace of mind. Her remorse was real, as was her willingness to accept whatever consequences arose. But Ridge, ever the protector even amid his pain, saw in her something he had long overlooked, not just the woman he loved, but a deeply human soul who had made a terrible mistake and carried it like a scar. Ultimately, the secret she had hidden was not just about a tragic past, but about the nature of fear, guilt, and the unbearable weight of shame. And Ridge, despite everything, chose to stand beside her, not because he had forgotten the hurt, but because he believed in the strength of healing, of facing the darkness together, and in the unspoken truth that everyone, even those we love most, are more than the worst thing they've ever done.